You might think you need to have amazing recordings, great mixes, and an incredible ear to make money in recording. And while you probably should, nobody is born with all the skills it requires to make a 10 out of 10 sounding recording. So while you're working your way up to having those skills, what do? Well, when I first got into recording, I had basically no idea what I was doing. And while I still have things I want to improve, I'm now at the point where I'm confident in my skills. And I've had amazing opportunities to make music for countless bands and artists, as well as brands and streaming services like Disney and Netflix. But what do you do to get booked when you're not so good at recording? Now, that's a great question, and it is the key to going from someone who records music as a hobby to someone who does it to make a living. So in this video, I'll walk you through the methods that I use to stay booked with lots of clients even when I barely knew how to make a record, including one big one that you can start doing right now that's so good it'll feel like you have an unfair advantage over everyone else. By the way, if you're new here, my name's Adam, and every week I release a new video about music production. So if that's something you're into, then go ahead and subscribe. Now let's back it up to the year 2012. The band I was playing in had broken up and I wasn't sure what to do next. I was getting pretty heavily into recording and our band would record our own demos. And when we broke up, I started doing some recording for other bands out of my spare bedroom. But my day job was actually working at a theme park hotel. And that's when I got a call from the producer that used to record my band. He let me know that he was moving his studio to a space about a half an hour away, and that if I wanted to take over his old spot, I could. Now, the rent was cheap enough that I could afford to cover it with my pay from my day job, so I signed the lease and got to work turning it into a super basic studio with my good friend David, who also played in that same band with me. And as you may have guessed, there was one big problem. My recordings were simply not that good. So we packed it up, we closed our doors, and we went back to our day jobs, right? No, of course not. We found 3 big ways to get booked and stay booked anyways. See, the first thing I realized is that most local studios weren't actually giving the artists what they wanted. Bands think they want amazing tones and great mixes. So lots of new producers and engineers have the artists come in and they lay down their parts as they would in rehearsal or at a gig, and then they hyper focus on getting the best mix, which they may achieve, but the band still isn't stoked on the finished product. And that's because what they really want first is to sound like they're tight, like they're good at their instruments, a really talented band. So instead of chasing our tails trying to have the greatest mixes of all time on sloppy recordings, we really focused on getting great at capturing good performances and getting really pro at editing, tuning, tightening things up. So even if the mix isn't totally top tier, the performances still sounded super professional. If a drummer or a bassist or a guitarist or a singer hears your recordings, I promise they're not judging the mix first. They are judging whether or not the instrument that they play sounds right. And if you leave it up to the musicians on whether or not their player is sloppy, or you just give them 1 or 2 takes and then you move on before they're even warm, the quality of performances you're gonna get is gonna be all over the place, hence an inconsistent portfolio and less bookings. Now, the second thing that helped me stay booked early on was niching down a good bit. So where I live in Orlando, there's a pretty great reggae scene, and some of the first artists I ever recorded at a studio were a part of it. And from there, I did my best to meet all of the other bands in that scene and dove headfirst into recording bands in that style. And in that process, I ended up connecting with the manager of a number of reggae bands in our state. And before you know it, my schedule was jam-packed with artists from their roster. Now, you can't be everything to everybody, but luckily, being something to somebody is enough to keep you booked and busy. So if you can find a niche and totally conquer it, you should. Now, the third thing that kept me booked up is something I still do to this day. See, most artists are looking to make content around the music they're recording, whether it's live sessions, short form reels and TikToks, or studio BTS. And I realized pretty early on that being able to include video in your recording studio's product offering is a huge bonus. But even if I'm not getting paid to specifically film anything, I'll often take video clips of the sessions and compile them into little studio highlight reels for my artists, which they always post on their social networks. Now, this is a big win-win because they get to promote their new music and your production business gets some love too. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out there and buy a camera or start working on your reggae production. It's more so about figuring out some angles that can make you stick out as a good choice to potential clients. If there are tons of producers who will do a good, decent job on your record, you will probably pick someone who's doing something a little different or a little more aimed at you specifically. And if your artists keep asking you if you do a specific service, or if you know someone who does, and the answer is no, why is that? If 10 people walked into your bakery every morning asking if you had cinnamon raisin bagels, you'd probably start working on a cinnamon raisin bagel recipe. If every artist you record asks if you know someone who, masters, how many times will it take for you to just say, yeah, I can do it? So anyway, let's fast forward to 2017. Which is when I get the chance to move our studio to a much bigger building a few blocks away. And it's one that we'd been eyeballing for a while, so obviously we jumped on the opportunity immediately. And while it was an upgrade in space, the overhead increased a lot. However, that additional space allowed us to offer something we couldn't at our old studio, rehearsals. See, as a producer, it's really hard to scale your business, since you're basically either producing a record and getting paid for that time, or you're not. And realistically, you can only produce so many records at a time. It takes brain power and dedication to make a record, and most people can only do so many in a month. That meant rehearsals were a great way to get paid for something other than producing while still using the space and the gear that I already had. And while you may not be able to host rehearsals, there may be something production adjacent that you can do to subsidize your income, whether it's podcast recording, remote editing jobs, on-location audio for films or orchestras or choirs. Really, it could be anything. So if you've got extra time in your calendar that you could take to pick up extra jobs, stuff that doesn't necessarily take up too much brain power, try and find some that work for you so you can stay booked and busy. Oh, and speaking of booked, I've got an update on my book. So I'm very happy to announce that the physical version of the Producer Planner is out now. If you want to get yours, I'll put a link in the description. I'm also going to keep offering the free PDF version for a while. So if you're interested in trying it out, click the link in the description and I'll email it to you for free and you can print your own. I've gotten so much really nice feedback on this planner and I really appreciate everyone who's taken the time to download it and print it out. So I can't wait for you to get your hands on the physical version. But anyway, back to the video. So around that time, while I was working with lots of bands and singer-songwriters, I also started making some custom music for brands. By chance, I got connected with some folks from a big company around town, and I got to work on music for an ad campaign they were launching. Besides being an absolute blast, their budget was way bigger than any local band. And that's when I realized I could focus a little more on custom music for brands, make awesome stuff for them, and that would allow me to make a more steady income while still producing bands and artists that I love working with in between custom music projects. And again, that doesn't mean you have to start making music for brands, but it's worth considering if there are some high value opportunities you may be missing out on because you're just not looking for them. Now, all of this is nice. But what's the one secret that will keep you booked even if you absolutely stink at recording? Believe it or not, it has almost nothing to do with the music and everything to do with being an undeniably great hang. The fact of the matter is, people like working with talented folks, but they love working with people that they're excited to see every day. Chances are high that the most talented people you know who can't stay booked are just not a good hang. And the people that make everyone feel like $1 million, the people that understand how to network, the people who keep in touch with their clients and follow up often, well, they are going to stay busy. It really boils down to just making people feel like they belong at your studio working with you. If you've ever heard someone say, dog, they only got that gig because of who they know, that is so unfair. Or, of course, they just hired their buddy to produce the record, what a joke. Or maybe you've even said that to yourself, then you know it's true. And while it may not seem fair, if you think about it on a human level, it makes sense. Your favorite coffee shop probably makes great coffee, but there are lots of places that you can go get a great cup of coffee. So when it's time for you to go get your cup of joe, you are probably going to choose the one that's comfortable, where the staff makes you feel welcome and you don't feel like you're getting rushed out the door as soon as you get your drink. Now, why would music production be any different? Now, this isn't me telling you to be fake nice or overly bubbly with everyone, but just to emphasize that you're making sure that your studio is a welcoming place where people come in and they leave happier than when they came in. It makes a world of difference for both repeat business and word of mouth. And those are the two biggest ways that you're going to actually book clients. Now, there are people that I've been working with for a decade plus, and it's because I followed up with them. I made sure they were having a good time, and I made sure they left in a good mood, because they sure were not coming back due to the quality of my recordings back then. So I hope these tips can help you think of some ways to get more bookings as a producer. But the hardest part for many is getting that first paid job. So if that's something you need help with, watch this video next. And if you've had a few clients, but you need help turning it into an actual business, then check out this one.